Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. I'd like to first thank His Excellency, the British High Commissioner to Kenya, Dr. Christian Turner, for the invite to dinner last night with BG. It was super to catch up with many people. Rob McCare, who was Dr. Turner's predecessor, Vimal Shah, who I co-hosted the MindSpeak with in January, Dr. Odoro Otieno, a very good friend, Eddie Jorogi I sat next to, and many people from BG. Very interesting company, and thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. They've spent $300 million on 3 drills offshore. Just to remind you about the Africa Rising Conference on May 29, May 30 in Maputo. The event is intended to follow up on the 2009 Tanzania conference, which helped galvanize international support for Africa after the 2008 financial crisis. The conference will bring together policymakers from Africa and beyond, the private sector, civil society, academics, and private foundations, with the goal of sustaining the current growth and sharing its benefits among African populations. I wrote that piece over the weekend of Matters United Kingdom and the scramble for Crimea, and I said, yes, London is booming, and indeed it is. And I think the city, and by extension the UK, is little like Dubai. Both cities have become safe havens in an uncertain world. I'd like to thank Beatrice Gachenge of CNBC for taking my thoughts on a number of issues. The link to that interview is on Rich Wrap-Ups. We covered the NSC, Co-op, Russia, tea prices. Most enjoyable it was too. I'm going to put up an image of the MICEX composite index. It's had a 3-day rally, and bear in mind that Russian equities, and I've been saying by Russia in a rather contrary manner, but I find that, when you look at the markets, you've got to cut out the noise, and the situation here is Russia trades amongst the cheapest valuations among 21 developing countries monitored by Bloomberg, with shares on the MICEX trading at 4.8 times projected 12-month earnings. The ruble gained for a 3rd day, and I've been saying buy the ruble and the MICEX. My home thoughts return to Don DeLillo. It is so much simpler to bury reality than it is to dispose of dreams. Stories have no point if they don't absorb our terror. I used to think it was impossible for an artist to alter the inner life of the culture. Now bomb makers and gunmen have taken that territory. The world is full of abandoned meanings. In the commonplace, I find unexpected themes and intensities. Finally, the less there was to see, the harder he looked, the more he saw. Point Omega. He's a brilliant writer, very luminous. And in that luminosity, really speaks truth about our contemporary world. President Barack Obama on Thursday ruled out a military excursion by the United States in Ukraine, saying that engaging Russia militarily would not be appropriate. In a separate interview with KSDK, Obama reiterated that a military option is not on the table, but that the United States and its allies are prepared to take even more disruptive economic sanctions. And bear in mind, Putin struck first and struck hard. I think he liquidated about $100 billion of US Treasury securities. Obviously, we do not need to trigger an actual war with Russia. He said the Ukrainians don't want that. Nobody would want that. That's the bottom line. Then I went back to the transcript of Putin's speech, and I'll just repeat a few comments, because it's worth getting in the mind of the adversary, I think. They have come to believe in their exclusivity and exceptionalism, that they can decide the destinies of the world, that only they can ever be right. There was a whole series of controlled color revolutions. Clearly the people in those nations where these events took place were sick of tyranny and poverty, of their lack of prospects, but these feelings were taken advantage of cynically. In short, we have every reason to assume that the infamous policy of containment, which I call encirclement, led in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, continues today. They are constantly trying to sweep us into a corner, because we have an independent position, because we maintain it, and because we call things like they are and do not engage in hypocrisy. But there is a limit to everything, and with Ukraine, our Western partners have crossed the line, playing the bear and acting irresponsibly and unprofessionally. If you compress the spring all the way to its limit, it will snap back hard. You must always remember this. He said, "We do not want to divide Ukraine. We do not need that. As for Crimea, it was and remains a Russian, Ukrainian, and Crimean Tatar land." He said, "NATO remains a military alliance, and we're against having a military alliance making itself at home right in our backyard or in our historic territory. I simply cannot imagine that we would travel to Sevastopol to visit NATO sailors. Of course, most of them are wonderful guys, but it would be better to have them come and visit us, be our guests, rather than the other way round." Members of the Federation Council, deputies of the State Duma, citizens of Russia, residents of Crimea and Sevastopol. Today, in accordance with the People's Will, I submit to the Federal Assembly a request to consider a constitutional law on the creation of the two new constituent entities within the Russian Federation, the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, and to ratify the treaty on admitting to the Russian Federation Crimea and Sevastopol, which is already ready for signing. I stand assured of your support. Frankly, I think he has a point. He couldn't afford to lose Crimea, and the annexation was pretty relentless and expeditious, I think. And I wrote about this over the weekend, where I said it would be simply unconscionable for Putin to lose Crimea. It would represent the castration of Russia as a geopolitical player. Zbigniew Brzezinski on this point said, "Ukraine, a new and important space on the Eurasian chessboard, is a geopolitical pivot because its very existence as an independent country helps to transform Russia. Without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be a Eurasian empire. More than that, without Sevastopol, it ceases to be a Eurasian empire." I'll put up the snake, which for me symbolizes what Putin calls the infamous policy of containment, which I call the policy of encirclement. I, for one, I thought it was all about the pivot to Asia. I thought that's where the resources were being concentrated. I think this is an overreach. I don't think the US can play the aggressive game on two fronts simultaneously. Michael McFaul, who recently stepped down as US ambassador to Russia, says President Putin is riding an utterly nationalistic fervor that's off the charts, likely to escalate tensions with the US and Europe over Ukraine. "I don't think he wants an off-ramp," McFaul said in a telephone interview. And then another article in Bloomberg saying, after annexing Crimea, President Putin may not need to invade the rest of Ukraine to bring it to its knees. Political and financial sabotage can work just as well, and I think that right is correct. He can just sit there, keep them on tenterhooks. That way the pressure remains relentless. While Putin promised that Russia isn't about to send in troops, he has plenty of other tools to undermine the Western-backed Ukrainian government. They include fomenting insurrection by Russian speakers, waging a cyber war, crippling Ukraine financially by ramping up natural gas prices, and demanding the repayment of billions of dollars in debts. Putin has the means to drastically destabilize Ukraine. The more problems and unrest, the better his chances of getting East Ukraine to exit and join Russia. I'll put up a photograph of him, and then refer to the debate, the sort of fracas between Ambassador Power, Samantha Power, and the Russian ambassador. Ambassador Power compared Russia's takeover of Crimea to theft. A thief can steal property, but that does not confer the right of ownership on the thief, she said. The Russian ambassador shot back, "It is simply unacceptable to listen to these insults addressed to our country." He added, "If the delegation of the United States of America expects our cooperation in the Security Council on other issues, then Mrs. Samantha Power must understand this quite clearly." By then, Power had left the meeting to her deputy. I'll put up a photograph of her and the Russian ambassador check, and you can see in the body language, you can you can imagine that these words were being spoken at that time. Lewis Lapham has written an interesting, quite long article, out of which I've just taken 2 paragraphs, The Death of Revolution. For the last several years, the word revolution has been hanging around backstage on the national television talk show circuit, waiting for somebody, anybody, visionary poet, unemployed automobile worker, late-night comedian, to cue its appearance on camera. I picture the word sitting alone in the green room with the bottled water and a banana, armed with press clippings of its once-upon-a-time star turns in America's political theatre, tie-dyed, brassiere-less on the barricades of the 1960s countercultural insurrection, short-haired and seersucker, smug behind the desks of the 1980s Reagan Risorgimento, asking itself why it's not being brought into the segment between the German and the Japanese car commercials. Surely even the teleprompter must know that it is the beast in the belly of the news reports. Czech playwright Václav Havel, just prior to being imprisoned in the late 70s by the Soviet regime then governing Czechoslovakia, said, "No attempt at revolt could ever hope to set up even a minimum of resonance in the rest of society, because that society is soporific, submerged in a consumer rat race. Even if revolt were possible, however, it would remain the solitary gesture of a few isolated individuals, and they would be opposed not only by a gigantic apparatus of national and supranational power, but also by the very society in whose name they were mounting their revolt in the first place." I'll put up a photograph of the MH370 found on Wired via Mora, Pinheiro, and Flickr. And then this caught my attention. According to a 2007 report by demography-focused think tank Population Action, 80% of civil conflicts between 1970 and the end of the millennium took place in nations where at least 60% of the population had not reached 30. Raises issues for sub-Saharan Africa, I imagine. Still, Ahmed Abdallah, the Egyptian activist, can dream. Someday we're going to be the winners, he says. International markets, the dollar held its biggest gain in 7 months. After Federal Reserve policymakers signal they'll probably raise interest rates by the middle of next year. The Bloomberg Spot Index rallied 0.8% yesterday, most since the 1st of August on a closing basis. The euro-dollar fell from above 139 to 138.36. Policymakers reduced monthly bond buying by $10 billion to $55 billion and said in a statement it will slow purchases in further measured steps. Fed Chair Janet Yellen sees a considerable time between the end of the stimulus and the first rate increase, meaning around 6 months or that type of thing. I don't think that's what people were expecting. That's a much shorter timeline than I think the markets were pricing in. Basically this Japanese fellow, Yuki Sakasai, saying the outlook for the pace of policy tightening is faster than markets have priced in. Entirely correct. She's exhibiting more urgency about normalizing monetary policy than I thought she would, and hence the quite strong rebound in the dollar. But we've still got to get above this key level of 80-10, 80-20 on the dollar index. The euro is at 138.37, the dollar index 79.97, so just below 80. Japanese yen 102.29, the Swissy 0.8811, the pound 165.39, best performing currency of the last 12 months in point of fact amongst the developed market currencies. Aussie 0.9017, India rupee 61.19, the South Korean won softer 10.7635, the Real 234.71, the Egyptian pound, we've been here for eternity, 695.63, and the South African rand moving a little bit closer to 11 at 10.8707. I'll put up a 1-year chart of sterling. It's gained 10% in the past 12 months and is the best performer among 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Key levels around this 80, 15, 80, 20 level. It's got to push on through there. Euro dollar, I still remain bullish. My stop still is at 133.80, but we are considerably lower than we were. Gold, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart of that, last at 1333.40. As I said, it had gotten very overcooked to the top side. I think it was overestimating the geopolitical risk out of Crimea. That's largely a fait accompli, and you can clearly see there is no appetite to take it other than linguistically to a more extreme level. In my opinion, crude oil, $99.38, expensive in my opinion, above 100. Ingredients for Horu Mon before grilling at a restaurant that I found on the Wall Street Journal. Must be hungry. I like this selfie taken in Phnom Penh in Cambodia, showing in the background a dilapidated structure in the middle of the fast-changing Phnom Penh. The white building is one of the most vibrant communities, and it's just a great selfie, I thought. Coming to Africa, Mozambique's government has accepted a demand by the opposition Renamo for foreign observers to monitor talks aimed at ending clashes that have destabilized the country. That's a big concession from the government, and an important one, and signals that maybe that Mozambique risk will now start to go lower. China's trade with Africa at a record high, this Christian Science Monitor saying that soared to a total of $200 billion. US trade with Africa only in goods, not services, totaled $85 billion, but another $11 billion in services, about half. European trade with Africa reached $137 billion in 2013. But you know, there is a lot of risk if China slows down. China's trade with Africa is largely import-driven. Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Cameroon, Republic of Congo, Gabon, Uganda, South Sudan, and the Sudan are the key partners. I see a sharp slowdown in China, and I think people are not factoring in that impact. We're already beginning to see what a slowdown in China will do to copper prices, and therefore to Zambia. I like this infographic that someone sent me, 8 maps that will change the way you look at Africa. Have a look at the world where this world 7 billion live, how the world would look if it were measured by its wealth. You can barely see Africa. The real size of Africa, which is what a lot of people say, the maps don't represent the physical size of it. Global vegetation, world water risk, and global internet usage. And of course we've had an internet revolution here. Energy poverty is also interesting, but we're seeing a lot of progress in that direction. The South African all share is plus 1.54% in 2014. The South African President Jacob Zuma benefited unduly from a $23 million state-funded security upgrade to his private home that included a swimming pool, cattle enclosure, amphitheater, the public protector said on Wednesday. But I think on balance, it wasn't as aggressive with the president as some people might have feared, particularly his handlers. The dollar rand, as I said, 1087. Look at that chart, you'll see 1060, 1055 is the top end of the range. We've gone to 1140. Seems to sort of drifting back to 11 now. If the dollar picks up any more speed and punches through those resistance levels on the dollar index, I think we could see a quick move to 11. Egyptian pound strong as you like at 695.44. The Egyptian stock market is up at a fresh more than 60-month high. It's rallied 23.02% this year, and I wrote about this on the 20th of January. I said if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi would actually get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. I'll put up a photograph of him when he was speaking during the graduation of a new batch of non-commissioned officers at the NCO's Institute in Cairo. And I'll put up another photograph I found of Egyptian youths in Cairo during the unrest in November 2011 via Getty Images. The Nigerian all shares not trading well. It's now down 9.84% so far this year. And that's all on that spat between the central bank and the government, in the sense that, you know, governance, anti-corruption drive is just simply not there, which is probably correct. Ghana Stock Exchange up 11.46%. They apparently pulled a potential Eurobond. Their Eurobond yields are getting close to 10%. The Zambian kwacha has been one of the weakest currencies against the dollar this year, losing more than 8% of its value against the dollar during this month alone, and we know why. Ethiopia sees output from Africa's biggest power plant by 2015 will begin generating electricity within 18 months. What will be Africa's largest power plant? Ethiopia's funding of the 6,000 megawatt hydropower project represents the golden age of our history as far as economic development and public participation is concerned. Interesting story about Coors-led African buyout fund negotiating from Kenya to Nigeria. 1001 Voices LLC, an Africa-focused private equity fund, said it's in talks about investing in 2 Nigerian companies in northern Kenya. Lots of activity going on. Africa's natural resource wealth, mapped by the African Progress Panel. I'll put that up so you can have a look at that. South Sudan's oil production is steady at about 160,000 barrels per day, but obviously will take time to recover to previous levels. 162,000 barrels per day from fields in Upper Nile State. Little change from the start of the year, is down a third from about 245,000 barrels per day recorded before the conflict flared up. Oil facilities in Unity State have been shut since supporters of President Kiir fought defectors who backed his sacked deputy, Riek Machar. Co-op Bank reported full-year profit after tax accelerated 17.922%. Loans and advances to customers expanded 15.1144%, which was faster than where I think the average lay. And basically profit before tax was up 8.901%, profit after tax up 17.922%, earnings per share up 17.934%, full year dividend unchanged at 50 cents, but what got everyone excited, it spiked up 6% yesterday, and it's up a total of 14.084%. 2014 was a bonus share of 1 for every 6 held, lots of retail investors, some bonus euphoria, I think. Jubilee Insurance reported full-year profit after tax increased 9.5563%. Final dividend 6 shillings a share, making a total payout of 7 shillings. Profit before tax expanded 17%. Profit after tax expanded 9.5563%. Earnings per share up 8.571%. Very solid business, very rich balance sheet. They've got lots of economic value, which they probably haven't marked to market on that balance sheet. But certainly we've seen a number of more recent, more aggressive players coming to the market. And I expect the competitor threat to expand quite sharply. In particular, banks, I think, are about to move into this space. Prices headroom up to about 380 over a period of about 6 months. It's up 14.285% so far this year. Kakuzi reported full-year profit after tax down 56.479%. This was expected. Tea prices have been very soft. Kakuzi, but it is improving its dividend payout ratio to 44.53%, which is a good thing. And consider that the net asset value is a multiple of the current traded share price. Organic earnings are weak, but I think we'll see a rebound this year as tea prices improve, following the wake of coffee to some extent. Kenya shilling 86.394. We've been here for a while. Nairobi all share up 5.67% this year, and just 0.587% below record high. Nairobi NSE 20 is up 0.37% in 2014. Nation Media reporting full-year results at lunchtime, and we've still got a few more to go. Once again, thank you for stopping by.